technologies implementation. So I think that you will have a lot of interesting information presented by our panelists. So my name is Anton Pfeiffer. I'm a research assistant at the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering and Naval Architecture of the University of Zagreb. And I welcome all of you once again. I would also like to invite our first speaker, Professor Neven Dujic from University of Zagreb, Faculty of Mechanical Engineering and Naval Architecture, to share with us his presentation and view.
Good morning to everyone, or good afternoon to Professor Wang. He's already five times later than we are. I will give a short overview of the project, and I will start with what is the research question that we are trying to solve with this project. So basically, if we look at this graph, we see the red line, which is European electricity demand. It's quite flat during the year. It goes up and down a little bit night and day. And then we have our wind and solar production, which is exaggerated here. Wind is around 10% and solar is around 4% actually. But I have exaggerated, having in mind that this will double in the next few years. So what if we actually increase this significantly in order to cover all the electricity demand? We need to maybe build 10 times more wind and solar than we have now. What do we do with the excess electricity that will not be needed to satisfy the electricity demand? Let's charge our e-cars. If we cover all the transport with electricity, it will only increase demand for maybe 20%. So we can, in that way, use excess production from wind and solar. And of course, in some hours of the year, there will be no enough electricity to do charging, but since cars have big batteries, they will be charged in the rest of the hours. What do we do with the rest? We can also electrify heating. Heating we need, of course, during the winter time, so we can heat our homes with electricity. And for the hours when there is no excess wind and solar, we can use heat stored in hot water. So what do we do with the rest of electricity still remaining, and which is probably half of it? We will use it for hydrogen and synthetic gases, which we can use then in industry and in heavy transport, which cannot be electrified. So this is in a nutshell the research question, but the problem is how we do it. This is not a simple thing as I have shown it up to now. It's much more complicated. So the project goals are how we interrelate between different power-to-X technologies, power to heat, power to e-mobility, power to hydrogen, power to anything. It's called power to X. Demand response technologies and market coupling in energy transition. We want to determine optimal technology mix. We want to avoid unnecessary technological lock-ins, which will slow down the process of decarbonization. So this is the basic project structure with work packages. I will not go into detail here. And the timetable, we have already done the work package 1, and we are now working on all other work packages. So the first work package was about how power-to-X technologies will work, how they can also provide balancing capabilities, We did the deliverable 1.1, which was overview of demand response technologies, commercial solutions, and hot prospects, and the 1.2 power to X technologies overview and their influence on variable renewable sources integration, commercial solutions, and hot prospects. So why do we need all this? Well, there is climate emergency, and everybody agrees on that. And the only way currently feasible to do to save the climate is to do energy transition and to move to new sources which are low carbon. What we know from the cost of technologies is that the only cheap technologies are wind and solar. The problem with them is that they are variable. But the good thing about their variability is that if we electrify transport and heating, we actually can use the excesses from wind and solar when there are too much of them, and also decarbonize those other sectors. So European Union has decided to be climate neutral by 2050, and that is the basis of European Green Deal. We are moving very fast towards that goal. What is the issue with renewable energy sources? We can see two graphs which are actually the same power system, but with a different production of wind and solar. On the left side, we see low wind, high solar. So we have one situation in which we still have energy that we have to provide from other sources in order to satisfy the blue line demand. And on the right side, the same system will mean a windy, sunny day, which will provide more electricity than we need. So we have to solve we have to cover all the needs of the system in a way that it will cover it in the left situation and in the right situation. So we have to study all the possible situations that can happen and provide with a solution. So what we want to do with power to X and demand response technologies. We would prefer to avoid curtailment. It will not be avoided completely because that's too expensive. But if we can use free electricity, because curtailed electricity is free electricity, if we can use it in some better way, we should do it. Storing energy is, of course, one solution that we will be using a lot in next 30 years. But storing electricity is expensive, so we want to avoid it and minimize it as much as possible. What do we want to do? We want to reshape energy demand profile by adding more demand in the hours when there is excess wind and solar electricity in order to heat our homes and power our transport. And we also want to see what are the monetary benefits of sector coupling, how we will pay for it. If we go for storage solutions, which are expensive, that will, of course, be more expensive. If we manage to do sector coupling with demand response, with correct financial signals, then this system will probably cost less than the current fossil fuel system if we do it right. So how the new system will slowly shape. We will have lots of electricity coming from renewables, and then we will satisfy with power to heat either through district heating or through individual heat pumps. The heating for buildings and industry, power to mobility will charge the cars. And mostly the cars will be charged at homes or at work when they're parked. They're parked 96% of time, so they can actually serve as tools for balancing the energy system. And the rest of excess of electricity will be used to produce hydrogen, which may either be used directly in industry all will be used to produce various gases and fuels for powering the rest of the system, which is hard to decarbonize. We have developed partially energy modeling software, a new version of H2S, which now is focused on the demand response. We do it on an hourly basis because this is what is relevant when you want to design the whole system, when you want to provide for the solution in winter, summer. If you have a high penetration of variable renewables, you need to calculate the full load hours, 8,760. We consider that solution of balancing is a technical issue, which is a very important issue, but we are not dealing with this at the moment. So what we have done up to now, it's we've built optimization package. Power to heat is included, battery storage is included, power to hydrogen is ready, now being debugged, and Dr. Felipe Feijó will give us further insight into this modeling software, which is multi-year optimization of both merit order and construction investment into the power system. So the future progress, we will now work more on the implementation of the rest of the flexibility options and of the demand response, as well as market coupling and assessment of available options. There are already 2 papers in the process of being published. They were published in conferences, but I hope they will soon also be published in journals. And with this, I would like to finish with my introduction, and I would like to see interesting debates and information being held during this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dujic, for the introduction to the project and views on demand response and power to X technologies. At this point, we don't have Q&A, or also we don't have questions in chat. So if there is some question, I would kindly ask the attendees to put it now in Q&A. We can have a minute or 2 for this. In general, all longer questions can be addressed in the later panel, but we are taking short questions after each presentation now. While we are waiting for possible questions, I would like to welcome Professor Fei Wang from North China Electric Power University, who is today with us. So, Professor Wang, can you hear us?
He says he needs 3 minutes to settle.
Okay.
So
we do have the time.
Let's try to make a discussion while we are waiting for him to set up the presentation. The issue is that with this corona thing, we forgot about different time zones. So he thought it was 1 hour later, and now we are setting up everything. I'm really missing traveling and the time zones. Yeah, the travel is one aspect of our lives that is most kicked by this crisis. But so all the time that we used to use for travel and to sightsee and everything is now actually spent working. Okay, so I will, since there are no questions, go a little bit back to some questions I'm often asked by people who are unsure about the system built on wind and solar. variability of wind in European energy system is not so big as it is on Croatian energy system. That's why we don't really want to build national energy systems in future. We want to build continental energy systems because that will be the cheapest way to balance. There is always at least 5% of wind being produced. So if we increase the amount of wind, we will most probably be covered all the time. That most probably does not mean always. So we will need backup. We will for sure need backup, but this backup will be used very rarely. We don't really need backup on a yearly basis. The last time there was a so-called winter windless week in Europe was in 2017. And since then it was never that wind went under 5%. So for those winter windless weeks, we will need backup. And the question is which technology will be the best for such a backup? I guess we will go for something that has low capex because we don't want to invest too much money in such backup technology. And we don't really care if the cost of fuel will be very high because it will be covering only maybe 100 hours per year every 3rd or 10th year. So I guess what I see now among available technologies that might cover this backup issue is engines, gas engines, but most probably running on hydrogen because we will have lots of hydrogen in the system. It could also be electric methane or some other fuel. We will see which one will go. Okay, so Professor Wang tells me that he's ready now, and you can then invite him to the class.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Deutsch. Professor Wang, you're very welcome. So thank you very much for making time to join us today. And I would like to invite you to share your presentation and share with us the views based on research from North China Electric Power University. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm trying to share my screen, and I need to adjust some kind of configuration of my computer.
Okay.
Okay. Probably there's some kind of issue with my computer about sharing the screen.
You should be able to share. It is enabled.
What kind of 今天你帮我看一下这个是什么原因啊？这个屏幕我共享。
Okay, we'll wait for a couple of minutes if you can address it, because from our side everything is enabled.
共享不了。
对，它是灰，它这个是蓝色的。
是已经在共享了吗？
我这儿已经共享，然后它让我改变这个设置，你看，共享屏幕，然后安全隐私与术语打开。I'm trying。嗯哼。在哪里？在这儿，隐私就是在这儿。往下走，往下走，屏幕录制嘛，这不就是？但是这里边没有 zoom 啊，要加一个是吧？加一个 zoom 应用程序 ，zoom， 对 ，OK，zoom， OK， 直到退出前 zoom 无法运转。I'm trying to create the Zoom meeting software and enter again, try to find whether this issue can be addressed or not.
Okay, maybe we can, Anton, move to the next lecturer while Professor Wang tries to resolve technical issues. I understand it might be a a problem because Zoom is not so much used in China. They have different applications. It usually works well within China, but there might be some issues, particular issues. What do you think?
Okay, in that case, maybe we can
Professor
offer
Wang,
this time slot
can we move to the next speaker and then you come back?
Professor Wang is now out.
Okay, so let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that, not to lose time.
Okay, so I would kindly ask. Okay, we can kindly ask Mr. Ivan Pavic from the University of Zagreb, Faculty of Engineering and Computing, to start with his presentation, except if Professor Wang is now ready. Okay, sorry. Professor Wang is now ready, so we can proceed with his presentation.
Could you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry for the delay. Because I'm just transferred from the freeway to a conference room. And okay. Let me begin. First, I appreciate Professor Neven Dioichi to invite me to participate in this international workshop. And I would like to share some kind of research works in my research team. My presentation title is Electrification of Transport, V2G, Smart Change, and their impacts on electricity market. I'm Fei Wang, coming from North China Electric Power University. Okay. The outline of my presentation is background, V2G and smart charge, EV participation in electricity market, and some kind of research works in my group. Background. Right now, according to the statistics data, we all know carbon emission from transport sector account for nearly 1/4 of the total emission globally, which means it's a very urgent issue for us to try to reduce the carbon emission. One of the most important job is we need to transfer the traditional oil fuel car to electricity vehicle. And basically, there are several different kind of catalogies for the electricity transportation evolution. But for us, I guess, in today's international workshop, especially for my presentation, the focus of my presentation is about the electricity vehicle for the road transport. Here is the 4 aspects about the benefits, what kind of benefits the electricity vehicle can give us. The first one is the greater EV efficiency and save money. Like we all know, if the people change their car from the traditional oil fuel car to electricity vehicle, and the cost for those cars can rapidly reduce. And there are some kind of the statistics data about 1.21 cents per gallon based on average residential electricity rate. In China, we nearly have about 1/3 kind of cost reduction if you change your traditional car to the EV electricity vehicle. The second one is we can create a lot of new jobs because industry related to electricity vehicle, like manufacture, like V2G, devices and other kind of technical services jobs. And the third part is the CO2 emission reduction. Basically, we have smaller CO2 emission if we use more and more electricity vehicle. And the last one is about the energy security for the country. However, if we want to make the transportation electrification to the more smoothly, we need to face a lot of challenges. One of the most important one is how to manage the charging for electricity vehicle. And there are 2 points I would like to raise to discuss with you today in this workshop. The first one is about smart charge. The second one is V2G. Of course, there are still some other kind of issues. For example, about the battery technology, about the the recycling and the second life use for the electricity vehicle battery, and the standardizations and other kind of technical issues still need to be researched about the electric vehicle and electrification transportation. So the second part, I would like to share the concept about V2G and smart charge. First, we can see in China, we have a lot of electricity deployment project in China. Basically, since about 10 years or maybe 15 years ago, we started the deployment of electric vehicle in different cities in China. According to the date, we have nearly 5 million electric vehicles on the road in China by the end of 2020. And the charging for electric vehicle, we can divide it basically into 3 different phases. The first one, we call it V0G, which also call it the dumped charging, which means there's no any smart or intelligence control for the EV charging. The second phase, we call it V1G. V1G means part of the smart vehicle charging we can control. And the third part, we call it V2G. Is also the same sound for vehicle to grid. So we call it V2G. And this is, you know, the topic a lot of people do the research, especially on the integration about electric vehicle to grid and the multi-way interoperation between the electricity vehicles and the power system operation. So the way from dumped to smart charging for electric vehicle is also the way we're trying to reduce the carbon emission in terms of transport electrification. And I would like to give a very simple description about V0G and what kind of harmless or adverse impacts of V0G. If only the owner of the EV simply plug in their electric vehicle car to the charger and have no idea about the price, about the load peak time, anything, we call it V0G. There are a lot of negative impacts of V0G. For example, it will greatly increase the demand of electricity. It is especially harmful for the power system operator at the peak time. And of course, if the owner charging their electric vehicle and time of use electricity price tariff or RTP, I mean real-time price tariff, probably he will pay or she will pay a higher electricity cost for his charging or her charging. And for the distribution network, V0G will make possibly grid congestions and may lower the power quality and make the transformer or cables overload. Here are some example for the diverse impacts of V0G. The left column is about the location. The middle column is the EV penetration rate. And the right one is the peak load increased. We can see even a very small EV penetration. For example, for the first one, is Los Angeles is only 5% of electricity penetration level. It increased about 3% of peak load. And with the development of the EV penetration level, more and more PV increase rate. So that means V0G is not beneficial for the power system and the owner themselves. So which means smart and controllable charge is needed. The second one I would like to describe what is V1G. V1G means partially we can control or optimally the charging behavior of the EV owner. For example, if the owner aware of there is a time of use tariff, she or she can charging his or her car under the time of a low electricity price. And that can help the power system to make benefit load shifting, and also can reduce the risk of network congestions, and also can accommodate more and more distributed solar PV system generations which means we can increase the penetration level of renewable generations. And at last, I would like to describe what is V2G. V2G can, do better integration than V1G, which means it can make the EV owner or the EV battery to discharge their energy from the electricity vehicle to the power grid, can help the system operator to better balance the generation side and the demand side. There is a chart to try to give a big picture about the difference between V0G, V1G, and V2G, which means the flexibility provided by electricity vehicles to the grid are higher and higher from V0G to V2G to V0G, V1G to V2G, which means more advanced smart charge unlock greater flexibility. Due to the time limitation, I will skip this one. And here we summarize the features of smart charge and the benefit of smart charge can give us. For example, it can reduce the impact of EV charging on peak load of power grid. That is very important. And also can minimizing the voltage deviations, line currents, power losses, and the load surge in the transformers. And also can help the operator to reduce the have the consumer reduce their cost of electricity, and help us to maximizing the use of renewable generation, which is very good to the whole society and the whole world. And also, in some terms, can increasing the system stability and reliability. There's a chart to describe the difference between uncontrollable charging and smart charging. Okay, there are some kind of smart charge pilot projects in US and Europe. And this is some similar pilot projects in China. We can see the last one at the bottom of this page, ICEV survey. ICEV is the abbreviation of a state grade EV service center. This is the very company who in charge of the electricity vehicle research and demonstration pilot projects in China under the control of SGCC, which is a state grid corporation of China, the largest power grid companies in China. We have a very good cooperation with ICEV. Even though smart charge have a lot of benefits for the EV owner and the power grid operator, but there are still some challenges need to address for us in the future. For example, for ordinary consumers, there are lower awareness about whether dump smart charge who is useful, who is beneficial for the power grid for the society, and also during some cases, smart charge possibly can reduce the flexibility, mobility, and convenience for the EV users. Also, there perhaps have some kind of cyber security issues, and also some cost and efficiency and connection standards issues in the future. And in the future, there are also some other kind of issue from these different aspects. For example, for the flexibility services providers, usually we refer to this kind of flexibility services providers to aggregators who collect a very large number of EV consumers together and then provide different kind of services to the power grid. For example, in the electricity market, nevertheless the energy market or the ancillary services market. And the third part is about the EV participation in the electricity market. as I mentioned before, the EV aggregator is an agent between the individual small capacity EV to the large power system, or to have those kind of transactions in the electricity market. Because according to the requirement for the participators of a wholesale electricity market, it has to be at least 1 to 2 megawatt capacity to play in the electricity market. And however, for a single electricity vehicle owner, the capacity is very small, and due to other kind of limitations, the EV owner cannot play themselves in the wholesale electricity market. So the agent, which is electricity vehicle aggregator, EVA, is very necessary. And they have different kind of transactions with the TSO, which means is the transmission and distribution system operator in different kind of business. For example, faster frequency reserves, and the primary reserves, and the secondary reserves, and the congestion management, while load shifting and peak shifting, and also voltage control. Sometimes it also can do some arbitrage in the market, of course, under the rules of the electricity market. And the EVA have optimal bidding in the electricity market, and on behalf of all the EVA customers to achieve profile maximization. And then after the market is cleared, and it coordinate all the EVs belong to this aggregator, and to make optimal control and optimal pricing, and decided what kind of incentives and price charged to those individual EVs, and then to provide those kind of flexibility to the market and to the power system operator. Here is the difference between about 10 years to 2010 and 2019 in Queensland. We can see the electricity price, the variability of the electricity price over a day have increased during the past 10 years in Queensland, which means there are more and more arbitrage room for those EV aggregators who play in this market. And then we can see with the participation of UVA, we can have high and large orders from the for the price in the market. And the EVA optimize the bidding schedule that provides the cheapest hourly price. So we can see the other consequences or better functions for the EVA is that the optimized bidding schedule of EVA can reshape the load demand of the power system, which has been already mentioned by Professor Neven-Duis at the beginning. Like this, valley filling and the peak shaving. And this is a table describes the EV reaps more profits and saving charge cost benefit from the decrease of peak valley differences. The EV also optimize pricing strategy to make the cost for itself during the group, which are aggregating all these individual EV customers. Also have centralized control and a decentralized control, different kind of forms for the EVA. Okay, at last I will show some research results and achievements related to the electric vehicles, smart charge, and V2G. For example, we analyze the value of market-based demand response on the aspects of improving power system reliability, especially under some kind of extreme circumstance for power system. And we also do some research on the impact factor analysis on the probability characterize the effect time of use demand response tariffs, use associating ruling manner method. This work is cooperated with Professor Nathan Dewich, and also some other kind of publications related to this kind of fundamental research works. About the transactions of UAV, also have some research, for example, about the day-ahead optimal bidding and the scheduling strategy for the distributed energy resources aggregator, and optimal bidding strategy for the DR aggregator, and also about the response capacity estimation and evaluation. The last one is about the optimized scheduling for EV aggregator for demand response, and some other related works. The first was about customer baseline load estimation, which is a very important issue to determine how much money it should be given to those participators of demand response. I mean, incentive-based demand response, not price-based demand response. And the second is also a very interesting research about distributed solar PV system, because sometimes the distributed solar PV system did not have individual measurement. So the impact of those distributed solar on the load curves cannot be accurately described. So we proposed a method which can evaluate and estimate the capacity and the real-time output power of those behind-meter distributed solar PV system. It's a very interesting research. And some other research about PV-assisted EV charging stations, and for those household EMS system, which can aggregate it together to participate some kind of VPP, visual power plant, and through the incentive-based demand response programs. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang, for a very interesting presentation. Since we do not have questions from Q&A, I would just invite Mr. Ivan Pavic from...
I have a question if we have time, Anton.
Well, we are slightly behind it, but if you have a short question, please do go ahead.
Question, okay. So it seems that the way smart chargers will work in China will be based on a central optimization. In Europe, we are thinking about price-based approach. We already have at least 2 or 3 tariffs in most of countries, and we are moving to hourly electricity tariffs. And by 25, each of the supplier has to offer 15 minutes tariffs. So how do you see what is simpler and what is more complicated? We know our approach will be extremely complicated because we will have to have many different chargers communicating with the system through the price, of course, but this can create non-linear effects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Nathan. This is a very good question. In my opinion, different demand response programs have different kind of a function and goal and purpose. For those price-based demand response program, they can vary significantly to reshape the whole load curve, which is very useful for the power system operators trying to have a good this value feeding and the peak shaving. But But the issue is it cannot have a very precisely or accurately response from the EV aggregators, because this kind of incentive from the price-based demand response need a lot of deployment about just like you said, communication and the measurement which installed on the side for the chargers to calculate when the charger is started and when it has been ended. So I guess it's possible from the aspect of technology, but maybe it really is some kind of difficult or complicated. But if you are trying to the other kind of incentive-based demand response program, the operator and the market only need to focus about the result which you would like to achieve from the demand response program. And then you can make the transaction in the market and you pay the money you need to pay and leave the work for those guys who like to do. They will find a way trying to grab the customers and make the very accurately to response to charge or discharge their cars at the precise time which you like to them to do. So that is my opinion. So in China, we're trying to work with those electric vehicle services companies under the control of the GCC, trying to do this work, focus on the market. This is the issue for this is the mission for the power grid companies, and focus on about the transactions and those kind of specific communication and calculation, and those kind of deals with numerous numbers of EV customers. This is we can leave this kind of issue to those EV aggregation companies. That is my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Wang, once again. I hope that you stay with us also in the panel. So now we can introduce Mr. Ivan Pavic, a PhD candidate from University of Zagreb, Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computing, who is preparing a PhD thesis on the influence of smart charging and vehicle-to-grid on reserve scheduling schemes. So, Ivan, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you see the screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. Just a brief introduction. My area of research is e-mobility and renewable energy resources integration into both power grids and electricity market, but mostly I focus on electricity market from a scientific side, where I do design bidding algorithms, but also do design of the market algorithms by themselves. Today, I will present you some of our research conducted as part of my PhD thesis. It's about energy and reserve scheduling with the use of V2G. First, we'll just go to the contents of this presentation, a brief introduction of the power system changes and the e-mobility landscape. The professors Wang and Duich already covered this, but I'll just briefly go through it. Then we'll talk about two different research directions that we conducted. The one is concerning the EV aggregation models, and the other one is about creation of bidding algorithm for the EV aggregator, which takes into account balancing energy uncertainty. Okay. For the introduction, as we already heard, the power system is under different processes at the moment. There's a lot of decarbonization in the power system, where new renewable energy sources are coming into the power system. What is one of the main challenges with this? The flexibility requirements in the power system increase as well. So how can we cover that new flexibility requirements? Well, we need to have new flexibility providers. There's one thing: we need to create new electricity and ancillary service models where those new unconventional technologies can bid. That's the liberalization bullet. And then we have the decentralization. We actually need to activate different small, so far non-active users to participate in different energy and ancillary service markets. And then we have the decarbonization of other sectors, such as heating and transport. And it means that they are basically also electrified, which can have a negative consequences to the power system, as we heard before, but it can also provide a new flexibility to the power system as well. Briefly about e-mobility status today. So we can see on the upper right graph that historically there's an exponential rise in EV numbers in the world. The EV global outlook forecasted new rise in 2025 and 2030, also with exponential rise. Which means that we will have more and more EVs in the power system. There's an interesting fact that we had 17,000 EVs in 2010. We had 17 million in 2019, and we will have around from 150 to 250 millions in 2030. Okay, but what's more important for us when you talk about power system and e-mobility is the intersection of those two sectors, and the intersection is on the charging stations. So as the EV number increases, the number of charges also increases. With the number of charges and with the number of EVs, the energy demand for the charging increases as well. And with the energy, there's also power capacity increase, which has more significant influence when talking about e-mobility on power system than energy demand. We can mitigate those increases both in power sense by using smart charging, as Professor Wang explained. By using smart charging, we can actually decrease peak power in the power system, and we can offer additional flexibility from the EVs. And by doing so, we can use smart EV charging to have a painless EV and renewable energy sources integration. So these are the three modes. Professor already mentioned them for the EV charging. We can have uncontrolled charging, where there's no flexibility from provision from that kind of charging. There's no communication between the charger and the system, and the EVs plug in and they charge at maximal power until they're fully charged. So we cannot provide neither up nor down flexibility. If we have unidirectional smart charging, then there's a potential to provide flexibility in both directions. So we can increase our charging or decrease our charging, and by doing so, provide flexibility to the power system. If we have bidirectional EV charging or V2G, then we can double our flexibility provision. Because we can charge up to installed power, but we can also discharge from our EV up to the installed power of the charger. So the flexibility provision drastically increases if we have such smart charging concepts. Okay, so what's an EV aggregator? EV aggregator is a new entity in the power system which enables flexibility provision from the EVs. It aggregates, it groups individual EVs and connects them with markets, whether they are energy or flexibility markets. And this was the reason why we actually where we've seen that there's maybe a challenge here that could be solved to increase the flexibility provision from the EVs, because today the EVs are not aggregated by themselves. The aggregators, the supply companies, the grid operators, they all sign contracts with the charging stations. So the charging stations are basically those who are providing flexibility from the EVs. So there are two EV integration models possible. We call them the smart EV and the smart charging station. In both of them, the physical connection, the energy flows are the same. So we need to charge our battery, and to do so, the energy passes through all the infrastructure, through the EVs infrastructure, charging stations, and lastly goes into the grid or comes from the grid. But when we talk about the market participation, we can have the smart EVs, which actually bid and schedule their own charging and discharging, of course, through the aggregator. Or we can have the smart charging station, which are doing all the bidding or all the smartness connected to the energy markets. So we developed a model. Here is a simple illustration. What are the differences between those two smart integration approaches? We can see. So this is the small example. We have 3 EVs and we have 3 charging stations. If we observe the EV behavior, then we see that the EV, for example, EV1 will be at the first charging station in the morning, then during the day it will be on the second charging station, and at the end of the day he will come back to the first charging station. And the EV knows its state of energy curve during all those times, and it can shift. If the aggregator aggregates the EVs, they can shift flexibility and energy between different charging stations. So because he observes the EVs. But if the aggregator observes the charging stations, then the curves look differently. And the charging station knows the state of energy of the EVs, which are only at that moment at their premises. They do not have knowledge about EVs behavior. It means mostly state of energy when EVs are driving on or when EVs are on other premises. So we have the same data, but there are 2 viewpoints and there are 2 different patterns. If we aggregate those patterns, they look the same, but the flexibility that can be extracted from those 2 different approaches is different. Here are the results of our research. So here we have 3 different days. So we modeled 3 different volatility prices. So we have the day with low volatility, we have day with medium volatility, and we have day with high volatility prices. And we have the 3 approaches. So the blue one is the EV aggregation, and the orange and the green are charging station aggregations. So these are the smart chargers, and this is smart EV. Those 2 are actually subgroups of smart charging station, and the only difference here is with the state of energy that the user wants at the end of the charging period. But what's the most important thing here is that the blue bar is always the lowest. So if there's a low volatility in prices, it will be similar to the smart charging station models, but still the cost of charging will be lower. If we have more volatility, the difference between those costs is higher. But if we have extremely volatile day regarding the electricity prices, then the smart EV aggregation will provide the lowest cost. It will actually transfer to the revenues. That's why this is negative. So the EV users during these days can earn a lot if smart EV charging is utilized. Okay, now we'll move on to the second part of the research, where we will try to explain how did we build a bidding algorithm for capacity and energy, for balancing capacity and energy markets. But before that, we'll just go through the different the EU market structure and its timeline, and we'll position our research on this timeline. So we have the long-term commitments. There are bilateral energy tradings or cross-zonal capacity trading or long-term balancing capacity auctions, etc. And then we have the day-ahead plans. So these are today's most important market, day-ahead energy market, but also the balancing capacity market, which is somewhat before day-ahead energy market. And then we have the intraday replanning, where we have the intraday energy markets and we have the balancing energy markets. And after the delivery, we have the penalization, or both for imbalances in energy-wise and imbalances or penalization connected to unsupplied reserves. So we will deal in our research during this presentation with those two segments. What's the status of internal markets in European Union? So the energy markets are coupling really well, and almost all of the Europe is coupled now. When you talk about energy markets, this is day ahead, and these are the intraday markets. But what's really interesting is that the reserve markets are being coupled as well, especially balancing energy markets through many different platforms. So we can see that here we have illustrated several platforms for different reserves, and most of the EU countries are part of those platforms. So we can see here for the IGCC or for AFRR reserve or MFRR reserve. So most of the countries are involved into those projects. And let's say for 2 or 3 years, most of the European countries will be part of those platforms, and they will buy and balancing energy from coupled markets. Then we have for primary reserve several platforms. We'll not go into them into this presentation. And then we also have the balancing capacity markets. These markets are the least developed when it comes to coupling, but there are some initiatives like German-Austrian cooperation for AFRR balancing capacity, or Nordic capacity market also for AFRR, or a scientific project which I'm part of, FARCROSS, which deals in developing a new market design for co-optimized energy and balancing capacity cross-border trading. If we are an EV aggregator or any other market participant to bid on a balancing capacity market, we must consider all subsequent markets as well, especially the balancing energy markets. So the reserve markets are split into two different markets. One is the balancing capacity market, which has the gate closure time before energy markets. And then we have the balancing energy market, which closes after the energy, the short-term energy markets. And it's as the time goes on, the uncertainty increases in those markets, but it doesn't necessarily mean that with uncertainty the participants have higher costs, because with right modeling, the revenues could even increase with those more unsecure markets. So these are the examples of uncertainty in balancing energy markets. So here we can see the activation of balancing energy for frequency containment reserve up and down. So these are the blue and red. And we can see the activation ratios for AFRR up and down, green and yellow. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There's no rule when or how will that reserve be activated. And the similar applies for the electricity for the prices. So here on the right graph, we can see the day-ahead market max and min prices, daily prices. And they are lower than activation up prices, especially here in this part of the graph. There's a lot of uncertainty in those prices, and there can get especially high for up reserve provision. Okay, what we wanted to do here is to build a simultaneous bidding algorithm on day-ahead balancing capacity and energy markets, where we want to minimize the total cost for the EVs, but we want to consider the worst case scenario of balancing energy activation. Why? We want to protect the EVs from entering the prohibited state of energy levels. So we do not want to have the EVs have the state of energies at minimal bounds, or that they cannot provide the services they were allocated at the day-ahead capacity market. How do we do that? We created a robust model for balancing energy activation. Okay, this is the modeling concept. I'll not go into details here. So our objective function is to minimize all costs. So we have the energy market costs and revenues, we have the balancing capacity revenues, we have the balancing energy cost and revenues, and we have some additional cost connected to EVs. Also, from the constraint side, we have the state of energy equation and limits, and we have installed the power and the power of charging equipment. We have additional constraints such as those for V2G degradation, etc. But what's important here, that when we are bidding, we have the uncertain parameter, which is the activation of the reserve. So we want to integrate the uncertainty of the activation in the day-ahead balancing capacity and energy bidding algorithm. So I just wanted to show you how does this uncertainty constraint look like. The problem can become really complex if we want to envelop all the uncertainty that's hidden within the activation of particular reserves. And this is only the part of the equations that we develop for the uncertainty of the balancing energy activation. But how did we create those equations? That's a more important question. First thing that we did is the detailed analysis of balancing energy activation. This is a part of the analysis here shown. And using these histograms and scatter graphs, we developed the bounds for our uncertainty. And the decision maker, the aggregator, can choose which uncertainty level he wants to model for its bidding strategy. For example, if he uses the yellow lines, then he's really conservative, and he will never he will encompass all the uncertainty hidden in the reserve activation. However, if he uses green, he's more liberal, and he will neglect some of the uncertainty, but he will neglect some of the uncertainty of the reserve which rarely are getting activated. And we can the same happens with the red curves. It's even more liberal, and it neglects even more uncertainty. And these are the results for 3 cases. So if we deterministically model reserve and energy bidding, then our algorithm says to us that we can bid a lot of reserves in the markets, and we earn a lot. But if we are more liberal, then we take into account more uncertainty. Then we bid less reserves. And if we are extremely conservative, our bidding will be the smallest concerning the reserve. Okay, but why do we want to be conservative? If we are really conservative, then we are at this point here. It means that we do not have, that we didn't enter the prohibited state of energy levels. It means that we can activate all allocated reserves. But if we are getting more liberal, then our state of energy bounds could be broken. So that's something that the decision maker should choose which exact uncertainty level does he want to have in his algorithm. Here, there's no errors. So whatever activates during day, he will be safe in the safe zone. But here, for example, if we disregard 25% of the highest activation of the reserves, then the results could be even worse than in the deterministic case. Here's just a review of several EV reserve projects in Europe. So this is not only in the research domain. In the Netherlands, there's a AFRR pilot project where EVs are providing a reserve. In Denmark, there are 2 companies that provide FCR reserve. Also, there's in Norway project with the startup called Tiber that provides fast frequency reserves. So these are the reserves faster than frequency containment reserve. And there are also some additional projects that are dealing with energy arbitrage of EV aggregators. What's the conclusion? Where the EVs connect both as sinks and flexibility sinks and sources. The choice of EV integration approach has a high effect on flexibility provision. The robust modeling can be a really nice tool to adequately model the uncertainty. What are our further steps? Well, we want to add the price uncertainty in this model as well on 3 levels. We want to add price uncertainty of balancing capacity, of energy market, and balancing energy market. Okay, that's all. Thank you. If you have any questions, please.
Thank you very much. So far, no questions in Q&A and chat. So maybe some of our panelists have some short question for Ivan. Otherwise, we will discuss further in the open panel. Great. If there is no other questions, I have one question for you. So you created all different algorithms for handling the reserve sequences that would activate the smart charging and vehicle-to-grid options. How do you see these options in systems which integrate several different renewable energy generator technologies? So, for example, wind and solar, and maybe a lot of run-of-river hydro, or maybe some other variable renewable.
So the bidding algorithm that I showed here, it's for the EV aggregators, but it can be utilized for any technology. So we focused on modeling of the reserve activation for bidders. So the bidders could be also renewable energies with integrated storages or something like that. So the bidding structure, the algorithm structure stays the same. Is that your question, or? But if there's different energy mixes in the power system, it just means that there are different flexibility requirements, different activations, different activation patterns. But the models are neutral to this. So the only thing will change the input parameters. How do we encompass and model the overall uncertainty set? But from the mathematical viewpoint, there's no change.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we can go on with our next speaker, and she's coming from our independent transmission system operator in Croatia. So I would like to welcome Dr. Silvija Pliškić from HOPS, and Silvija, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Could you please confirm that you can see my presentation?
Not yet, we are waiting.
Can you hear me?
Now we can see. Yes, now we can see everything.
Okay, thank you for introducing me. Thank you for inviting HOPS to this webinar. As it is so, HOPS is committed to take the part in enabling the green energy transition and climate neutrality goals. And HOPS is also very interested to see into the results of different innovation and research projects, including this particular one, InterEnergy. In the next 15 minutes, I will provide you with the basic data on a transmission system grid in Croatia and main challenges with which HOPS is coping in operating the system with high shares of renewables, including the enormous interest of investors in connecting the RES generation facilities to the transmission grid. As a TSO, HOPS performs its activities in accordance to the rules of EU legislative framework. And in the light of ongoing transformation of a power system, TSOs of NSOE anticipate the need to adapt the electricity grid and markets in order to be fit for the power system of the future as the part of the integrated energy sector. Therefore, NSOE and TSOs work on future power system and market design and publish a few documents which will be mentioned in presentation. Also, there are numerous research and innovation projects ongoing with the goal to build the knowledge capacity, how to use the new technologies and new software solutions in operation the transmission grid. And HOPS takes part in some of them. Some of them are also financed by the Croatian Science Foundation, and a short overview will be given at the end of this presentation. HOPS is a Croatian transmission system operator. Its basic task is to maintain the security of supply, to operate the Croatian power system, and to manage the transmission grid, which consists of more than 200 substations and switchgears, and transmission grid of almost 1,800 kilometers of line at a voltage level of 400 kV, 220 and 110 kVs. The data shown on the screen are the basic data for 2020. Peak load exceeded the 2,800 megawatts. It was slightly lower than average peak load of the Croatian system during the previous year. Historical peak load is almost 3,200 megawatts, but in 2020 peak load as well as other data were influenced by the influence of coronavirus pandemic on economics and all other aspects of social activities. This chart shows the variation of hourly wind power generation output. It helps to understand the challenges of HOPS in operating a power system with a high share of renewable. Just to mention, there are almost 5,000 megawatts of generation capacities connected to Croatian transmission grid, of which 44% is hydro and 50% is wind. So the challenges are sudden changes of wind production output, electricity surpluses during night hours, occasional network congestions due to the simultaneous maximal wind and hydropower generation, a growing need for control reserves and balancing energy, lack of market mechanism for power system balancing. Currently, HOPS has at its disposal the conventional sources of balancing energy through frequency containment reserves, automated and manual frequency restoration reserves. And I would like to mention as a significant improvement of Croatian balancing mechanism, the service of demand-side response, which HOPS started to procure by public tendering in December last year. After successfully performed the pilot project, currently there are 5 service providers which qualified for this service with a total of 46 megawatts of capacity for this service. These data on generation mix evolution are shown. because HOPS plan its transmission grid development according to these numbers. I will not read these numbers. They are part of the presentation. You can see them on the screen. I would like just to stress that for the next 10 or 15 years period, there is enormous interest of investors. It exceeds 10,000 of megawatts of renewables, mainly wind and photovoltaics, to connect to transmission grid, but HOPS built its transmission development plans based on goals from National Energy Strategy. The majority of projects are planned to be located on the south of the transmission system, while the demand is situated on the north. As you can see, there is only one 400 transmission line connecting north and south of the system, as well as only one 220 kV. So there is obvious need to reinforce the transmission grid of Croatia. To connect all planned generation, and in order to achieve all the goals given by the National Energy Strategy and European Green Deal, this significant transmission grid reinforcement is needed to enable transmission of electricity from the generation to consumption location, including cross-border transmission and access to single European electricity market. Those investment projects are revitalization and increase of transmission capacity of existing transmission lines in short term, and construction of new 400 kV substations and lines, including specific zones for RES facilities connection and interconnection projects in a long-term period within 10 years and after. So together with all European TSOs and TSOs of a core capacity calculation region, but also national level, HOPS is very committed to implement the obligations stemming from EU legislative framework, third energy package network codes and guidelines, and clean energy package regulations and directives. Mr. Pavic already mentioned market integration projects, single day-ahead coupling and single intraday coupling, which are operational. I would like also to mention core flow-based market coupling project, which go live is planned for 2022. European platforms for exchange of balancing energy were also mentioned by Mr. Pavic, Mari, Picasso, International Grid Control Cooperation, as one of most significant new requirements from clean energy package. I would like to mention 70% minimum capacity rules, according to which 70% of thermal capacity of lines should be made available to the market by TSOs. So the clean energy package is an important milestone for Europe's green energy transition, and its timely implementation is the priority for NSOE and TSOs. Major trends which are reshaping the power sector are also mentioned before: higher RES integration, electrification of transport, building and industry, decentralization, digitalization, and sector coupling. So Europe's energy sector is shifting from a fossil fuel dominated and supply centric model to a clean, digital and electrified consumer centric with many distributed generation resources. So NSOE Vision 2030, published in 2019 with its two focus papers, One System Vision and Market Design Vision for 2030, aims to contribute to this goal. Also, this year, NSOE has published the discussion paper on the design of the European electricity markets in 2030. in order to facilitate the achievement of 2030 climate objectives. Stakeholders are invited to express their opinion on numerous market design related topics, which are grouped in three main pillars: wholesale market, adequacy and investment signals, and congestion management. So in light of a changing power system, TSOs consider that the electricity grid will remain the cornerstone in reaching climate neutrality by 2050. They see their role in sector integration at three levels: vertical, horizontal, cross-sector. Vertical system integration assumes TSO, DSO cooperation, exchange of information, consumer engagement. Horizontal system integration is exchange, cross-border exchange of energy between countries and market integration, while cross-sector system integration will bring new elements, new complexity, and good practices that TSOs have with vertical and horizontal integration might not be sufficient. So in order to be ready for the future design and to enable green energy transition, TSOs need to accelerate their research and innovation activities by a knowledge building on how to use new technologies and software solution, demonstration by pilot projects, and investments in a natural environment. So as I have already mentioned, HOPS participates in some of those projects. SIREN is a project of Croatian stakeholders for smart integration of renewables. It was focused on HOPS system operation practices and the flexibility requirements, and as a result, it showed there is economic benefits in installing small and medium-sized storage units, mainly battery storages, to Croatian power system. WindLips is also a project of Croatian stakeholders for wind energy integration in low inertia power system, which examines renewable energy sources potential to provide initial inertia response and ancillary services, and participation of wind power plants in frequency and active power regulation to increase the stability of power system from economical, regional, regulatory, and technical point of view. Crossbow is a project of international stakeholder consortium for cross-border management of variable energies and storage units, enabling a transitional wholesale market. In the scope of Crossbow project, 9 different tools were developed to demonstrate the new technologies in a natural environment, to facilitate the high-res integration, and which will enable TSOs and DSOs to reduce network operational costs and to improve economic benefits of renewables and storage units. Flex Grid is also a project of international stakeholder consortiums of 31 partners. In the scope of the project, advanced tools were are developing for electricity grid modeling, flexibility assets management, and data analytics and renewable generation forecasts. New market procedures will be developed to enable system operators to manage their electricity grids by interacting with the energy service providers and renewable producers. One of the most significant HOPS innovation project is Synchro Grid. It is a smart grid project of Croatian and Slovenian TSOs and 2 DSOs for better integration of regional electricity markets, increase security of supply, and increase inclusion of RES in the market. Also, I don't have on the slides, but I would like to mention Far-Cross project, which also Mr. Pavic mentioned. HOPS is involved in 2 working packages of this project. One is dealing with the complex grid management technology by installing the dynamic line rating devices. And the other one mentioned by Mr. Pavic is OptimaCap, co-optimized cross-border capacity auction algorithm for optimization of the usage of the available transfer capacities for reserve procurement and for energy trading. Also, HOPS has a project on knowledge capacity building in the field of cybersecurity, having in mind the increased digitalization and the need to share the enormous amount of data information. To conclude, from the TSO perspective, it will be impossible to achieve the changes of a power system only by building a transmission infrastructure. It is necessary to use new digital technologies, develop advanced network, smart grids, which will enable to integrate all needs of future network users and ensure effective management of decentralized electric power system. So digitalization will be a key to secure the advanced electric power system of the future. Electricity grid will remain a cornerstone of a power system. The projects in which HOPS takes part are working on the innovative solutions in grid asset management to accelerate the green transition through improved power generation forecast and grid optimization technologies. With increased variability, unlocking the potential of new market participants and increase consumer choice and inclusion, enabling new sources of flexibility to reach the market will be essential for secure and affordable transition. So, I made a mistake. Thank you for your attention. That will be all from me for now.
Thank you very much for interesting presentation. We have one question that is short for now. So Croatian power system is well interconnected with other systems. What is total capacity for cross-border transfer, thermal capacity or max power? Capacity of 220 kilovolts or 400 kilovolts lines?
Well, depends on the border, the conditions in the grid. So it's calculated on a long-term and short-term basis. Those data are available on the NSOA transparency platform, and also I'm not sure about the exact numbers, so I would not like to reveal these numbers.
Not even maybe some range between the minimum and maximum available transfer capacity. What would be typical for all the borders for whole Croatia? Because probably our viewers are from the modeling background and they would just like to pick point on what would be realistic numbers for overall transfer capacities.
I can only say that for the time being, Croatian power system is very well interconnected, and its transmission capacity exceeds the need for import and export, and also exceeds the generation capacity. So transmission capacity at the moment is adequate. But in the future, it will not be the case, so certain grid reinforcement will be needed.
I have just one maybe short question. In new sources of flexibility for transmission system, or at least on the level of transmission system, how are energy conversion technologies such as power to heat or similar demand side interventions, how are they handled? Do you have maybe some examples where someone is providing flexibility by introducing something like power to heat or power to some kind of gas, or is there any plans that you are familiar with for someone to be included on a transmission level?
No, at the moment there are no such concrete projects in Croatia, but we anticipated this possibility when building our 10-year network development plans. HOPS will not invest, at least it's not planned at the moment, in such a conversion, but will need to connect such facilities to its transmission grid.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we can move to our next presenter, and she's coming from European Union Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators. So Mrs. Henny Radanovic, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anton. Just give me a second to present video as well. Are you able to see the presentation and my screen?
Yes, we do. Just please do it full screen.
Yes, trying to do that. Thank you. Yes. As Anton said, my name is Henny Radanovic. I work in ACER, European Union Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, and to be more precise, I work in Market Codes team of the Electricity Department. So my presentation does not have that much background as the other ones, but I think it was very well covered by other presentations. And also the time frame I'm talking about is mostly just for the next couple of years. Sorry. Sorry, can you still see full screen? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, now we can see it in full screen.
Thank you. So what I'm going to cover, definitions first of all, because I took liberty of changing it slightly. And then I'm going to just remind you of existing electricity network codes and guidelines and the clean energy package. I'm going to say something about the European Commission priority list for future network codes. And then I'm going to take some parts of the most recent asset study that was done for the European Commission on the regulatory priorities for enabling demand-side flexibility. So what they identified as issues and also what they see as future policy options. And then I'm going to explain to you what the ACER role in the whole process is and what the next steps are. So yes, when I said the definitions, I just demand response is already term defined in the directive, new directive 2019-944, which refers to final customers and change of electricity load. But from what we heard in all the options and what the authors of the study argue is that the demand-side flexibility is a lot wider term in the scope. It hasn't been defined yet, but it's been worked on this. So energy storage, storage using electric vehicles, demand response, energy efficiency schemes, etc. So if we just, if I just show you the existing network codes, you can see it here, that came out of the third energy package. And they were already mentioned by Sylvia, and many projects like SDAC, single day ahead coupling, single intraday coupling, and all the platforms for balancing energy came out of these codes and the third energy package. So we have connection codes for high voltage direct current connections, for demand connections and requirements for generators. We have operation codes, system operation guideline, which is the one for in normal operation, a set of rules and principles, and also emergency and restoration for emergency alert other states than normal. Market codes is the team I work in, and it was already mentioned in all of the presentations. So it covers CACM regulation that covers day ahead and intraday time frame, forward capacity allocation, which covers long-term timeframes, and electricity balancing, which is maybe for this purpose of demand response, maybe the most relevant and most important one. Adding to that, the fourth or the clean energy package, we have a new regulation, electricity regulation 2019-943, and the directive 2019-944. You will see in the presentation how is that relevant and the changes that are supposed to happen. So According to this new regulation, the European Commission is actually obliged for every 3 years to establish a priority list and to identify the areas to be included in the development of network codes. So for this period, 2020 to 2023, they actually recognize the importance of demand-side flexibility. So they picked it as a priority list together with cybersecurity code. So there is a lot of discussions ongoing and will be happening in the next couple of years of this topic. So this asset study that I'm referring to now is the study done by the contractor for the European Commission. It's publicly available, so you can all download it and see it in much more details. So they were looking at the barriers to demand-side flexibility in the European scope, and they identified it, of course, at transmission and at the distribution level. So for the transmission level, the main barriers, which are, let's say, well known. First of all, the scope of the pre-qualification process limited to TSOs for system balancing purposes, as you might know, pre-qualification process. So each service provider needs to go through a pre-qualification process in order to make sure that they can actually deliver services they intend to provide. Also, it was mentioned a lot, they recognize the limited harmonization of the aggregation framework at EU level. So in order to address these, which are at transmission level, this requires, if we go back to that, you remember the picture with all the codes, it requires amended CACAM balancing, SOGL, but as well as requirements for generators and demand connection codes. Then the main barriers on distribution level, which was less known and less discussed about in the past. And this is how the DSOs to take more active role than they were traditionally doing. And still at the moment, like the option they opt for is mostly grid reinforcement. But indeed, the idea is that they look at flexibility services rather than only investing in network. I mean, sometimes it's necessary, but there has to be an optimization when it's better to do one or the other thing. So also high-level principles exist, but the key design features are not clarified. So if I just show you the next slide there, you can see for DSO level, on the distribution level, the range of design options. So on the left-hand side, you can see, for example, product definition, market delineation, market platform operation, DSO-TSO coordination, and integration with existing day-ahead intraday balancing markets. So you can see on the left-hand side, these design options can be purely locally, because DSO market is local market, and congestions happen locally. Then we have here at least some sort of harmonization or principles on a national level. And then here we have all these things that can be at EU level. So for example, for product definition, and you mentioned it a couple of times today, like the market coupling. So we have, like in SDAC, SIDC, also in balancing energy platforms such as Mari and Picasso, we have standard products because it increases competition and it removes these barriers compared to each country having their own products. So as for the policy options, certainly because some things on demand response and these high-level principles already exist in the new directive 2019-944. But the issue with this is, as you probably know, for directive, it's up to each, so regulation is directly transposed into EU law, international laws, but directive is actually leaves it up to each member state to decide how they are going to do it. So what they don't recommend is just because of the lock-in and cross-border effects that EC does not take action, But what they recommend that they take action, and for the existing regulatory framework, 3 options are available. So it can be amendment of the existing codes, new network codes, and a combination of amendment and adding a new network code. As for the next steps in this and what's happening now, so there is joint DSO and TSO task force, which already works on it with European Commission and ACER as observers. So what we are waiting for is there a roadmap that is to be shared by July 2021. ACER is directly involved in this process, and my team will be included in the formal scoping and drafting on non-binding framework guidelines. So this roadmap, which will set the most important topics that need to be discussed, and as I said, where is the right balance of, because this area is so new, where is the right balance of harmonizing and setting the principles, and leaving it, on the other hand, leaving it up to member states to decide on it. So this formal scoping that I mentioned, that ACER will take the main role in, is supposed to happen until the end of 2021. And then ACER will inform the European Commission on the outcome of the scoping, which should happen early in January 2022. And following this, the European Commission will indeed decide whether they will go for a new network code or an amendment of the existing network code, or a combination. So following this, European Commission will request ACER to submit non-binding framework guidelines, and then ACER will do drafting. The process is slightly different depending on an option that will be selected there. But yes, the non-binding framework is expected to be sent to European Commission, so in 6 months period to August 2022. And then following that, the timeline hasn't been fixed yet, that's for sure, because there is the whole European Commission asking member states and the whole comitology process, but it is expected for the next, as I said, 4 years, maybe 2024, the end, that the clear guideline in some sort will be there, which will then help and shape certainly the future of this topic in European Union. Thank you very much. That would be all from me. I'm happy to take questions either now or in the panelist session afterwards, or you can always contact me on my email, heni.radanovic@acereuropa.eu.
Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. I don't see any questions from the audience. Maybe the panelists have some question for Heni.
Maybe I can comment something.
Of course.
All the new network codes introduced new complexity for the TSOs. We are welcoming, because our activities are performed in strictly regulated frameworks. So we are welcoming the new network codes on demand side flexibility.
Yes, no, I certainly agree. It is challenging and there is a lot to it, but I think added value of some is certainly important. I mean, all the savings made in SDAC, coupling of the ahead intraday market, as well as, for example, imbalance netting process, for example. So yes, I know that sometimes for TSOs and DSOs can look like demanding, but I think it's good. And also forgot to mention one thing. So in each step of the process, stakeholders are invited always through the public consultation to contribute to this. So if there are good ideas, good projects, good recommendations, you're all welcome to submit it there, and it will certainly be reviewed and taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you once again, Henny, very much for the presentation. And now we'll proceed to our last panelist, Felipe Feiju, PhD from University of Zagreb, working on Interenergy project. So he will share with us the next steps of our project. Felipe, the floor is yours.
All right, can you see the screen?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you, Anton, for the presentation. As you said, my name is Felipe Feijó. I'm a postdoctoral researcher working in the Interenergy project here at the University of Zagreb. And today I'm gonna describe a little bit with more detail how we address the modeling of the energy system. And basically I'm gonna describe a little bit the details of the model that Professor Deutsch described in the very first presentation. I also want to say that this work is being done in collaboration with Anton Pfeiffer, Daniele Gruppi, Luca Herc, and Neven Deutsch. So to start with, let me move forward. This is just a brief introduction on basically what I'm going to describe today. I'm going to start with basically the main goals of the Interenergy project, an introduction to the proposed model, some of the main features, the optimization setting, versus some other ideas that we can think of in terms of modeling, different existing models in the literature, and then I'm going to go deeper in terms of how we address the issues of flexibility, demand response, and Power-to-X technologies. So, to start with, the main goal of this project, the Interenergy projects, are basically the following: to investigate the optimal mix between different Power-to-X technologies and demand response in a market coupling environment, to provide a comprehensive knowledge about these technologies, their opportunities also on these emerging markets, and also very important to say is basically to provide an environment for the future generations of researchers, how we can create knowledge and tools that can be used to educate people in this context. And I also want to say that this stage of the project where we are developing this model is basically part of the work package 2, which is basically modeling the influence of the different demand response technologies and Power-to-X technologies. So to put into context how we try to address these objectives in terms of the building or the process of building the model, we need to take into account a model that can actually allow the consideration for different technologies, and more importantly, the unique characteristics of these different technologies. So when building the model, we cannot just simply say, oh, we are going to consider in general terms maybe heat pumps, or maybe in general terms some fuel cell technologies, or in general terms some electrolyzers. We actually need to consider the individual characteristics of the different type of heat pumps, individual characteristics of different type of fuel cells and electrolyzers and so on. So we need to keep in mind this concept when we're building the model. And additionally, thinking in terms of an environment to educate future generations, we also want to keep in mind that we want to build a model that is free, open source, and can actually be used for everyone. The model is not yet available, publicly available, but we'll make it available and probably on a GitHub account in the near future. And it's going to be, as you will see in this presentation, freely and open source for everyone to use, everyone who is interested in using this model. So a little bit about the structure of the model, what this basically model is, as Professor Deutsch said in the beginning. This is a new version of the H2RES model. This version of the model is basically formulated as a linear programming optimization model. Linear programming basically means that we only consider a linear relationship between different variables and investment decision and dispatch decisions that we consider in the model. H2RES is a long-term energy capacity investment model, but more importantly, we model this long-term capacity investment taking into account only dispatch level. So basically, for instance, we are able to run H2RES from 2020 all the way to 2050, come up with the optimal sizes and capacities of different technologies, not only in the power sector, but also the size and investment capacities of different power-to-X technologies, and also taking into account the early dispatch of all these technologies from 2020 to 2050, or any time horizon that the user might be willing to go for. So given this, H2S basically finds or provides the cheapest mix of technologies to supply the energy demand from different sectors. And the cheapest is basically defined on the mix of technologies in terms of, as I said before, the size of or capacities of these technologies, again, not only in the power sector, but also the heating sector, different sizes for storage level for hydrogen, stationary batteries, the dispatch for all these technologies, transformation of different energy carriers. We have the possibility to limit or minimize the CEP or the critical excess of electricity production, and many others. So basically taking into account all these different aspects of the energy system, different costs associated to different processes, H2S will find the cheapest way of supplying the demand, taking into account all these decisions in a long-term environment with earlier resolution for the dispatch of different energy sources. The optimization basically done in order to comply with different policy options. Among the options that we have modeled so far and are available within H2S, we can consider limits or costs on the critical excess of electricity production. We can consider different level of penetration of renewable energy sources. We can consider, for instance, limits on CO2 emissions, or any, I put here CO2 equivalent, but in general, we can put limits on any type of greenhouse gas emissions that we can consider, or we want to consider in the model. So from that point of view, it's very flexible. And also what is very interesting and important is that we can consider all these policies together. So it's not like, running scenarios in which we only care about the critical excess of electricity, or we only care about the emissions or limits on CO2 emissions. We can run simultaneously some scenarios that optimize the sizes, dispatch, transformation, storage level, taking into account all these policy options combined in a single shot. So this is a general overview, a diagram of what the proposed model basically looks like, some of the interconnections that we model or links that we model into across the different sectors. So in very general way, I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into all of these, let's say, boxes in the next slides. But in general terms, we differentiate between two sets of technologies in the power sector. All those units that are non-dispatchable units. So we consider solar, wind, and river, basically, hydro runoff river. And then we consider dispatchable units, all thermal power plants based on coal, oil or diesel, gas, biomass, and some hydro sources, hydro dam or hydro pump systems. We also can model imports into the power sector. And we put here in small letters nuclear, basically because this model right now is being a model from the Croatian point of view. So for those of you that are familiarized with the Croatian point of view, Croatia has some nuclear, but is currently in Slovenia, but we can also consider nuclear as a dispatchable unit that's been optimized within H2S. I just want to say that this is very general. So if people want to use this model to analyze different power systems in different regions or countries, it's very simple to set up the model for that purpose. So all these different thermal plants and not dispatchable units in the power sector are being optimized simultaneously. So the model will choose optimal size for solar farms, wind farms, biomass units, hydro dam, and power pumping systems. And simultaneously, as I said before, while we're choosing the capacity based on the capital costs of or capital expenditures to invest in these technologies, the model is also optimizing simultaneously the dispatch of all these different technologies, taking into account all the possible linkages that you can observe here. So for instance, for some thermal units, they can also serve or they can work as CHP units, so they can provide some heat to the heating sector. Particularly the heating sector, we differentiate two types of demands, district heating and other heating or individual heating. So this can be supplied either by CHP, by traditional fossil fuel boilers. They can be also supplied by different heat pumps or electrical boilers if they are chosen by H2S as a feasible option. We also optimize and choose the storage level for these different technologies. Those are, we can also model the production of hydrogen based on electrolyzers, also taking into account the capital cost for these technologies. Fuel cells, similarly, hydrogen storage, and additionally, we can take into account different electrofuels that can be produced based on hydrogen. And basically, all these linkages and investment in technologies and dispatch are basically done to satisfy the energy demand in different sectors, like in the transport, building, industry, or any other sector that users might think of. And additionally, we also consider the integration with the electric vehicles and stationary batteries. So I'm going to talk a little bit in detail in the next slides how we model vehicle to grid and stationary batteries within H2RES. But this is just for you. This figure is for you to have an idea of the general overview of what H2RES looks like. So how we model specific power to X technologies for flexibility within this model. Let me start with power to heat. So we model different heat pump technologies, for instance, air-to-air, in both individual demand and district heatings. And additionally, although not a flexibility option, we also consider the integration between the power sector and the heating sector with combined heat and power. As I was saying before, the model is very flexible. So we can actually consider several district heating zones or district heating areas within a single optimization. So in this example, I'm basically showing that we have a district heating zone 1, zone, and M, so we can have as many areas as we want. Each one of these might be linked or not with a CHP unit. Additionally, they can be the demand can be supplied by traditional boilers, or as I said before, if the model finds this to be a cheap solution, we can also go and electrify the electric sector by producing or supplying the electricity, the heat demand with electric boilers, air-to-water heat pumps, air-to-air heat pumps, or any other available technology that we can predefine. Additionally to the district heating demand, we can also model individual demand, which just as a district heating, it can be supplied by traditional fuels or traditional boilers, and also by electric heating. What is also interesting, since we allow to model different areas or different zones, we have to also consider different COP values for these technologies. And in fact, H2RES allows to model the COP for each technology, for each demand, for each zone in an hourly scale. So it's very detailed and very precise in order to provide more accurate results. Moving forward to a different flexibility option that we have modeled within H2RES, we have power to hydrogen. Just as a power to heat, we also allowed for the investment in different technologies or type of electrolyzers to produce hydrogen. Additionally, we also allow for investment of different technologies of fuel cells if we want hydrogen to work as a backup for electricity, as Professor Deutsch mentioned in the beginning, in those hours in which we will not have sufficient solar or wind energy, we will need some backup, and hydrogen can be one of these sources of backup, either through fuel cells or gas turbines based on hydrogen. This is not fully implemented yet, but it's in the process of being developed to have this option as a technology in the model. And additionally, the model also chooses the optimal size for a storage required in any given year of the optimization planning. So this is also a diagram that where basically we can observe how the electricity sector is linked to the hydrogen production. As I said before, we can consider some polymer membrane electrolyzer, solid oxide electrolyzer, alkaline, different type of fuel cells. In this case, we are also showing only 2 technologies, but in general, we can consider as many technologies as we want, each of these with its own specific characteristics. And they are linked basically to the storage that there is built, and this is also used to supply the different hydrogen demand from the different sectors that we want to model and consider. I'm Additionally, as I said before, a third technology that we consider for flexibility is the integration with the transport sector, particularly vehicle-to-grid. So vehicle-to-grid within H2RES also serve as electricity storage. So we consider two types of storages for electricity: stationary storage, which is also optimized by the model, and the link with the electric vehicles and vehicle-to-grid. So what we assume in this particular case for H2RES is to follow the same modeling ideas and assumptions that the model energy plan assumed. So we are following basically the same modeling paradigm than energy plan. We basically take into account some distribution profile for the transport demand, peak demand, the grid connection capacity and different efficiencies, capacity of the battery storage, the share of electric vehicles that are parked at the peak time. And with this, we can create some early profiles for demand and basically model the integration between the power sector, the vehicle-to-grid demand. We need to supply their demand in every given hour of the optimization period, but also we can use the storage as the batteries from the electric vehicles as a storage possibility for the power sector. Additionally, I want to talk a little bit more in detail about how we model the power sector, because it's probably the most important module or area within H2RES. As I said before, we consider mainly, or we differentiate the power units mainly between dispatchable and non-dispatchable units. Among the non-dispatchable units and the dispatchable units, user can actually decide different level of aggregations. They can consider, for instance, one single zone for wind farms or one single zone for solar power. They can consider one single unit or as a single unit hydro sources or thermal units, or they can model, if this is of interest, every single power plant, for instance, in Croatia at a single level. So the model is very flexible from that point of view. But what is more importantly, because of this aggregation, we can actually model multiple zones, so different zones for the non-dispatchable units, particularly for wind and solar. And I'm going to show in the next slide why this is important. So we are not limited to a single zone. We can model as many as we want, and each one of these zones is optimized individually, optimized in terms of the capacity and the dispatch for these different technologies. And we also consider some decommission and obsolete rates for all power plants. So we decommission existing power plants and also new capacity that's been added throughout the optimization period is being decommissioned by different vintages that are considered within the model. How fast the power plants are being decommissioned and retired is also predefined by the user and is defined by each of the power plants. So each of them will have a different decommission rate. Why we need to model different zones, especially for renewable sources? Let me see here. There is one picture that is not showing up. Give me 1 second. This figure, what this is. Okay, I don't know why the figure is not showing up, but let me, I don't know what just happened here. Okay, I'm just gonna continue. So particularly if we take into account the case of Croatia, particularly in the solar availability, we can consider basically three main areas. The southern part of Croatia has a high potential for solar energy. The Istria area might be considered as a mild availability for solar potential, and the inner side, the area of Zagreb, has a lower availability. So basically, we will end up with very different results if we consider a single zone for solar units versus if we consider different areas with different availabilities and different profiles being optimized simultaneously. Same idea for the wind sources. So that's why this is very important for us to take into account how we can optimize each of these zones individually. And we have the same idea for hydro units. H2RES consider hydro dam, hydro pump systems are also run off or over river units. Each of these is optimized also individually and simultaneously within the H2RES setting. So how H2RES is structured and used is basically built using the Python language. Python, as you know, is a free programming language, so everyone can download it and use it. We build the model using Python and we solve it using Gurobi, the Gurobi solver. So Gurobi is also free for everyone under the academic license. So basically we make H2RES freely available to the community. And there is very minor knowledge about Python that is required to actually run and be able to use H2RES. Since we model H2RES as a long-term energy capacity investment model with orderly dispatch, the computational time at some point might become a little bit extensive, but it will really depend on the size of the scenario that users are willing to or are interested in considering. But as an idea, when we consider the early dispatch choices from 2020 to 2050, taking into account 5 years time intervals, so 2020, 2025, 2030, all the way to 2050, taking into account some policy options, the model more or less takes about less than 60 minutes or 1 hour to solve. And if we consider a single year, let's say we want to optimize only 2020 or the year in 2050, the optimization is basically done in less than 5 minutes. So depending on the user preferences, they can range between these intervals, but in general, waiting up to 1 hour to get the dispatch in our hourly scale with investment throughout the planning horizon in 60 minutes, it's something that can be considered very doable and efficient. We have 3 main, here I'm gonna have an issue because I need some of the figures to show up, and I don't know why this is not working. Can I have 1 minute until to close the presentation?
The presentation.
Yeah, let me close this one. I'm gonna open the slides again. Sorry for this. Give me 1 second.
Okay. Okay.
Maybe take important pictures with this screen and then they don't work out. Yeah, now give me 1 second and see if I can open this one here. I have it here. Now what I'll do, I'm gonna share a different presentation that I had before, which basically have the same slides. But wait, the figures are also not showing. What's the problem? Give me 1 second, please. Give me 1 second. Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right, so let me, I'm gonna open a different slide with especially the same views that I wanted to show. So this is what I was saying before, Gurobi and Python, and this is the structure of the model. So basically we consider 3 main directories. We have the data folder, what we call the result folder, and what we call the scripts folder. So basically the data folder is what considers all the input files, information about power plants, information about solar and wind availability, information about the technology options, and so on. The results folder is basically what will save all the results for the different optimizations that we want to consider. These folders are created automatically once the model is solved, and the name of the different folders are basically defined by the user before running the model, but all of this is created automatically. And then the most important folder is what we call the scripts folder. which basically has these 4 main scripts. Want to combine and create the output file, which is the combine and plot, create and process the data, and build model. Any changes that users want to make into the equations of the model must be done in this specific file, which contains basically which has all the equations and the algorithm to solve the problem. And additionally, we consider this main file. It's actually called main.py for Python. So this particular file looks something like this. So this is basically the main file that users must use in order to run a simple scenario. As I was saying before, the name of each of the scenarios that will be saved in the result folder are defined here. So user will basically say or put here the scenario name that they want to consider. And then there are different parameters, true or false, that the different users can also choose to model different policy options. For instance, if we want to consider some targets on renewable energy, if we want to consider some carbon limits, if we want to consider hydro storage, if we want or not to consider critical excess of electricity limits, if we want to run the model in an hourly scale, or we can actually run it in a daily scale for debugging purposes. If we want to consider, for instance, a C value and we set it as true, we can actually say, okay, we want the critical excess of electricity production to be at most 5%, or we can put any value that we want to analyze here. So this is basically all that users will see in terms of Python, which is really not much complicated. Users just really need to define some Boolean parameters or true or false, and whether those parameters are, if those parameters are basically defined as true, then the user will need to provide the actual values that they are interested in looking into. Running this file will basically, or opening this file, setting these parameters will actually proper set H2S, and we'll be able to run it without problems within 5 to 60 minutes, depending on the size of the scenario that users want to analyze. Additionally, remember we have this data folder where we must put all the input data for the model. So in the same main file, this is where the data will be basically defined. So within the data folder, we will define data for the generation units or the power plant, demand level, different fuel costs, availability for non-renewable energy sources, and so on. Basically, we define here what are the input files that are going to be read. And that's pretty much all the coding that users must perform before running H2S. Again, defining some Boolean parameters or true or false, and then here basically defining what are the files that are going to be read within the data folder. So this is basically what I mean when I say that users require very, very minor knowledge about Python. This is all Python that users must know. So what the model produces as output after the optimization is performed, there is some automatic report that is generated. So for instance, here we see for different solar and wind areas. In this case, we have 2 different zones for solar, 4 different zones for wind. We can see what is investment that was chosen by the model in each of these different zones in different periods, in period 1, 2, or period 3. We can also see percentage of renewable energy sources in the market, what is the SEP in each one of this year, what is the CHP generation and electricity to heat, the net value and the actual percentage, and there are so many other key parameters that are predefined and calculated by H2S, so users can easily see the outputs of the model and make some initial analysis. We also provide some figures that are created automatically by the model, that is dispatched by different fuel types, by hour and for each year, capacity investments, hydro storage level for each of the hydro units, and so on. There are many figures that are also created automatically. And this is other, again, like some other outputs that we can observe from H2S. The profile, some pie charts, the different dispatch for given hours and so on. So I think I'm running out of time. I had a sample case that I wanted to show you, but maybe let me only describe this last slide to show how the flexibility options work within H2RES. So let's consider, for instance, a simple case, a case in which we want to model 30 years. So we run from 2020 to 2050 in five years time intervals, and we want to consider different limits on the critical excess of electricity production. And let's say also that we want to achieve a percentage of at least 80% in 2050 of renewable energy sources. And let's also say that we want to achieve 70% of emission reduction by 2050, based on 2020 values. So in this case, if we consider a set limit of 5%, 10% or 15%, we end up with very different mix of investment of solar and wind capacities. So we can go from 1.7 gigawatt to 1.8 gigawatt of solar. We can go from 5,400 megawatt of wind all the way to 6,400 megawatts of wind if we relax what we how much excess of electricity we want to consider in this optimization. What really changes here is what we can see, for instance, here in power to heat. This is the percentage of electricity that's being used in the heating sector in different years under different sublimits. And what is more interesting here, if we look in, for instance, in 2050, we can clearly observe that the lower the SEP, so for instance, if we compare 5% versus 15%, we end up with more electricity being utilized in the heating sector. This basically means that if we are not willing to lose electricity, as Professor Deutsch was saying at the beginning, free electricity from wind and solar, in this case, we are only willing to lose up to 5%, we must develop more technologies that can actually electrify the heating sector. And that's what we can see in this blue bar in comparison with the blue bar, in which we end up with a lower share of electricity being used in the heating sector. We can see the same idea with hydrogen generation. When we allow a lower SIP, we end up with more hydrogen being utilized than when we allow for 15% of critical excess of electricity, in which we require lower level of flexibility in the market. So this is just to give an idea of the kind of analysis that we can do, how different flexibility options can be modeled and utilized. And that's all what I wanted to mention today. I'm sorry for the figures. I'm not sure why they failed, but if you have any questions, you can contact me or any member of the team. Thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Thank you very much, Felipe, for a comprehensive presentation. Now, I think the most prudent way would be to switch directly to the open panels. So both for receiving questions regarding the new model, and also we have one question that is general for all our panelists, and the question mostly addresses the first three presentations. So the question says in the chat, is there any data available on the attitudes of electric vehicle users, drivers, as to how willing they would be to allow the use of their batteries for flexibility provision? Are there any estimates on what would be the value of flexibility provision for the end users? And how would it be formulated? For example, lower energy price, monthly fee, price per kilowatt hour, or flexibility provided? This is, I think, the general question. And I would suggest we start with Ivan. Ivan, if you have some answer or data regarding this.
Well, I'm not sure that there's much papers concerning the attitudes for the V2G. There are some papers, and you can Google. We can try to Google it, but they are not so comprehensive. I believe that there's a gap in the research concerning the attitude of drivers towards the V2G. There's an attitude the drivers toward the electrification in general, but not for V2G. And for the estimates on what would be the value of flexibility provision, I can say that NUVE conducted a pilot project for V2G provision in Denmark for primary reserve provision, and they stated that average per vehicle revenues acquired by providing primary reserve is around 1,000 euros a year. So that's the revenue that the NUVE get. And there's another question, how much of that revenue the NUVE will transfer to the end user. And that's the start of the last question, how would it be formulated? Well, I believe there are different types of users. So if you are a user that uses EV once a week, then you have a lot of flexibility with your EV because it's all the time parked at some parking place. And if you're a user that uses the EV all the time, drives around and always charges to have enough energy to drive, then your flexibility is much less. So there will be probably some kind of categories of what type of users you are, and that's how you can get the flexibility revenues from the aggregator. So for the user which doesn't use his vehicle a lot, the lower energy price that doesn't mean much because he doesn't charge a lot. But for him, it would be better to have a monthly fee for the flexibility provided or price per flexibility provided. But there are no strict business models yet because it's still not in totally commercial phase. Those are all mostly pilot projects. So the best business models will yet to be shown.
Okay, thank you, Ivan. I would move to Professor Neven Dujic for his view on this topic.
Well, driver actually wants some utility from his car, and he doesn't really want to care about charging. He would prefer not to have to think about that too much. What he wants is in the morning either full car if he goes somewhere, or enough electricity so he can reach somewhere where he needs to go. So he will let the algorithms actually decide about charging. And smart charging is not decreasing the life of batteries, so there is no cost to smart charging from the point of view of the car. So for him, smart charging is perfectly okay as long as it provides utility that he needs. Since the cars are parked 96% of time in average, that means we will have lots of cars thinking in that way about smart charging. And then most probably drivers will prefer to charge when it's cheaper to charge, which means that at least in Europe, smart charging will most probably be price based. On the other hand, vehicle to grid reduces the lifetime of battery. So that will be quite expensive, I think. Drivers ready to reduce the life of battery of their cars will want it paid very much. And I've seen papers calculating that, and the conclusion, general conclusion that vehicle to grids will not be that usually used as smart charging, because it is quite detrimental to the batteries, and the price would have to be high. But on the other hand, the security for the system vehicle to grid technology will offer will be huge, because we will only need it a few hundred hours a year when we don't have enough variable renewables. So it will be completely viable to pay this excessive cost of vehicle to grid. So I think we will have vehicle to grid, but it will be actually delivering not too much energy, and it will be significantly more pricey than smart charging. Smart charging is something that is actually something that customer doesn't really care about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Wang, if you have maybe comments on this topic because of a large body of research that you did. Okay, if not, I have one, let's say, side question to this is what would be maybe the difference in pricing between using vehicle to grid only seldomly, so that it doesn't really reduce the lifetime of the battery, and using it very often. This might be some choice of the models, of the business model for the user.
I don't have that data. Let's look at the price of charging. The part of the price of charging will be paid by the transport system, because when you have electric car, it has to be charged. But the transport system will mostly want to pay for the dumb charging. So it will pay for the wires and for the connections. But for the smartness of the charging, meaning controller, which will in some way decide when it will charge and when not, that is something that is useful to the power system. So that will be most probably paid by the power system to get higher utility, or the cost of that will be shared between the transport system, or the willingness of driver to drive electric car, and the power system, which needs smart charging. So once you have a smart charger installed in every parking place, vehicle to grid is not a very big additional investment. I mean, everything is already connected. There is a communication channels, you have smartness, and now you only need a bidirectional electricity system, which is something that we are now installing in many homes with PVs. So the additional cost of vehicle to grid is not that high on the system compared to smart charging, while it is very high on the battery because it reduces significantly the life of battery. That's why I see it happening only sometimes, but the additional value of the reserve to the system of vehicle to grid will be huge, because we need reserve to the system. Currently, we have lots of reserves. There is more than double installed capacity than its peak. But that will fade away when we close most of fossil fuel power plants by 2035 or something like that. So it will be obvious later that we will need vehicle to grid, even though it will be used probably not.
If I can add on Professor's comments, yeah, I believe that the V2G will be used for the reserves, not so much for the actual energy withdrawn from the grid and injected to the grid. I done some analysis a few weeks ago for the secondary reserve in Germany, and if you compare the activated reserve to the total allocated reserve, it's somewhere between 2 to 5% of the actual allocated capacity is activated at the balancing energy market. So you see, the EVs could do that. They can be allocated for the capacity, but when there's needed, they can provide some of the energy balancing. But those energy that's really needed is low. It's much lower than the overall capacity that's allocated. But they can also bid on that energy market high price. And if they're activated, then that high price of energy activation will be sufficient to cover the degradation losses of the EV battery.
Okay, thank you both very much for the comments. I have one question for Mrs. Pliškić and Mrs. Radanović. So, as I understand, both energy transmission system operators and agencies use commercial and long-term energy planning tools sometimes for the analysis and for creating future scenarios and plans for investments. How open are you to using newly developed long-term energy system models, especially if they're available for free and open access?
I can start. Generally we are open, especially if there are some results which are available. So yes, TSO is open and very interested.
I would say in our view, it would probably not be so. I'm not saying that we wouldn't be very open, but the studies are usually done externally, done by NSOE, for example. So we would use studies created by others in softwares and use the results for that to advise on policy options. And just maybe on the previous discussions on EV vehicles, yes, I can just say that the way how Ivan and Evan are thinking about this, like what EV would provide. I mean, now I'm saying this not as any agency view, but personal view. Probably, I mean, the behavior we see now in Europe with demand response customers, for example, industries that are there, they are in balancing capacity. As you said, the way how balancing capacity is dimensioned is always way exceeds how much energy is actually activated. So probably for EV vehicles, they would use this as well to compete in balancing capacity, get their payments from there, but then for balancing energy, bid sufficiently high prices, let's say opportunity costs, in order to get their revenues from there. But yes, I think the whole idea of European market is market-based behavior, and it's very important that they don't manipulate the prices then by bidding in too high, because they never want to be activated. Because such cases exist in Europe nowadays with some, let's say, not typical service providers, where this is not their primary activity.
Can I add something to my?
Of course.
Can I add something to my previous answer? So HOPS participates in different projects where different tools are developed, and also provides its data for model buildings, and it's open and takes into account the result of this analysis, and especially when planning its transmission grids. So yes, I can confirm that we are open.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your answers. So if there is no additional questions between the panelists.
I have a question. I think I'm muted.
Of course, please.
Yeah. It's a question to Silvia Pliškić. I was maybe it goes a little bit away from the flexibility or power to X technologies ideas, but I was very interested in the transmission aspect that you were discussing during your presentation. Basically, when you mentioned that a lot of transmission maybe needs to be planned and built, since most of the future renewable sources will be installed in the southern part of Croatia. So my question basically goes in the following direction. To me, it might not be really or the only thing about capacity, but also about robustness, particularly thinking a little bit in terms of what happened in Texas this past year during winter, and the lack of the winterization capacity that they had, and basically, you know, the whole grid basically shut down. And thinking in the Croatian geography, when you have most of this new capacity being installed in the south, and they have to go, you know, cross the mountains, go to very windy, snowy, you know, regions, and come all the way north to the main load, which is in Zagreb. How do you actually build and manage and plan all this new capacity investment, not only from the capacity point of view, but also from the robustness of the transmission grid?
Well, HOPS takes into account all available new technologies for transmission infrastructure, building grid enhancing technologies. Yes, we are aware of that, but anyway, we need to provide transmission capacities in order to enable all market participants, also renewable generation producers, to reach a single European electricity market. So electricity transmission grid is essential for the future.
Well, if I may add, HOPS has published a very good 10-year plan for investment. And I think it's still online, if I'm not wrong. So, but I think it's only in Croatian, or at least I have seen Croatian version. I hope there is English version somewhere also. You're not sure, yes. Well,
I will note it down.
So unfortunately, my postdoc has to use Google Translate to translate it. But the plans are there. They will have to be probably dynamic because things are changing very quickly. But we will see quite a lot of investment in the grid in the future 10 years.
Can I also just not add to this point, but just say like investments, but like with the development of flexibility markets, maybe less investments would be needed, right?
Yes, we agree, and we evaluate our plans every year. So we publish our development plan every 2 years. So we will take account the development of new flexibility assets, but at the moment there is still a huge interest to connecting large-scale renewable projects. So we don't have much choice. We must provide access to the grid to all interested investors.
On one point, I agree with Henny. Croatia needs 15 minutes intraday market to help with balancing. Now, most of Western markets already have this 15-minute product because that can save on tertiary reserve quite a lot. But to Henny, maybe a typical Croatian problem is that most of the production is in the south and most of the demand is in the north. So I think we will have to consider building additional linkages between south and north. Because if we want to add another 2 gigawatt of wind and 2 gigawatt of solar in the south, the current grid just cannot evacuate it.
Yeah. And in the near future, the generation capacities will significantly exceeds the demand. So we also need to provide the access to the European markets. Or if there will be enough flexibility assets, then it will be solve part of the problem.
Well, the market that has a huge demand and it's close to Croatia, it's northern Italy. What about HVDC? Is it in a 10-year program?
Not, but I think in the near future we will start considering it, having in mind the new renewable directive coming into the force.
Okay, thank you all very much. Is there maybe some additional question? It seems that we are done for.
If there's no question,
today.
I can add that I have checked with my colleagues from a system operation department for the net transfer capacity we have asked for. So for the European borders, we offer to the market for just I need to open the sheet for the Slovenian and Croatian border, 1,500 megawatts in both directions, which represents 30% of installed thermal capacity of the line, and for the Hungarian border, 1,000 megawatts in one direction and 1,200 megawatts in Hungary-Croatia direction, which is respectively 18 and 22% of installed thermal capacity of the line. The limiting factors are internal congestion in Croatian transmission grid, but also similar problems in neighboring control areas, especially in Hungary. So at the moment, we are working on the action plan to provide 70% capacity to the market, and we are analyzing the measures which are needed to fulfill the requirements from the European regulation on internal energy market.
Sorry, just on this point, the agency ACER actually publishes a quarterly report on what the cross-border capacities are on each border in European Union. So for those who were interested to see figures, I'm sure you can find it on the website there, plus the ENTSO-E transparency platform that Silvia mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you. I had slight connection problems, so I didn't hear if you addressed the question from our Q&A that says who will be responsible for the price difference in purchased energy for a day ahead and generated consumed when demand response is activated. Will the aggregators have to pay to the BRPs for that energy difference?
So it will depend on the business model and market model in the future. So, but it must be the balance service providers will be compensated in a certain way. So how it will be, it will depend.
Sorry, Anton, can you read the question one more time?
This is a very complicated question, you know. Question is, can we answer it? Anton, are you going to read it again? No, Anton is lost, so I will read it.
Anton is muted.
I think
who will be responsible for the price difference?
Now I can hear you.
In purchased energy for a day ahead and generated consumed when demand response is activated? Will the aggregators have to pay to the BRPs for the energy difference? I'm not sure I have answered to this, but let's look at one example. the Croatian power utility wanted to install 80 megawatt electric boiler in Zagreb cogeneration plant. For them, on the energy basis, the project was completely viable, but the connection cost, the power connection cost, was so high because this boiler was treated as demand that it killed the viability of the project. So now the legislation is being changed in order to allow for such demand response to work in different business model, which would actually help integrate higher penetration of variable renewables. And then if that is implemented correctly, and general position of experts is that we should think about going away from the flat grid fees and not charge them when there is excess renewables. That would actually make it completely viable just playing on the market. I don't know, Goran, if that helps in answering your question, but may probably.
Hopefully it does. Sorry, I had slight connection issues. But now the discussion really took up some steam, but unfortunately we are now quite overdue with the time, so we would have to go towards the closure of this webinar. So for this reason, I would like to thank all of the panelists for your time and valuable contributions, and also for all the attendees who stayed with us for additional time to and I hope that all of you got some interesting views and information that will help you in your work. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Thank you.
invite.
Have a nice day.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.